Peace. Thank you for joining me for Changing the Narrative, teaching Black history beyond slavery and oppression. Presented by myself, Brian Knowles, the current manager of the Office of African American, Latino Holocaust and Gender Studies for the School District of Palm Beach County. Traditional narratives have either omitted or minimized the historical contributions of Black people. So during this session, we will explore the extensive history of African people on the continent and throughout the diaspora. So my aim is to expand the story beyond the confinement of slavery and civil rights, which is the typical narrative that plays out in classrooms throughout our district and throughout our country. One of the roles that we believe that we have as educators is to empower our students, and this is only partially true. If you look at the Latin roots for the word educator or education, it comes from a word called adducere, which means to lead forth or to draw out. This is indicative that power is something that's innate to all of our students. It's just our responsibility to support and help our students identify and access that power. It's our responsibility to create learning environments that are conducive to these students developing that power. One of the ways that we can help students develop power is provide them with empowering curriculum. And for this space, we're talking about Black students specifically. So how can we help our Black students identify the power that is innate to all of them? One thing that we can do is that we can provide a curriculum where those students can see themselves in a positive way, where they can identify with ancestors who have done great things, have made powerful contributions to history. And also, let's create environments where our students can be who they are, be the best version of themselves, with no need to assimilate or surrender their cultural or racial identities. So I'm going to start off with this quote, and I'm going to have a few of them throughout this presentation. This quote comes from Carter G. Woodson, and it comes from his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, which was published back in 1933. And it reads, "The thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies." What Carter Woodson does here is that he summarizes the psychological and sociological damage that is done to Black people when their history is not taught, or when there's learning environments where their culture is not represented. And sometimes what happens when our culture is attempted to be identified or represented or being taught in our classrooms is not our entire history. Like, for example, this would be a common image that can be found in a US or world history textbook, almost in any classroom. And it shows us in subjugation, and it shows us almost defeated. It shows us in slavery. Then we get across the Atlantic Ocean, and this is where we are. We're in cotton plantations in the southern colonies of southern states. And of course, there are always gaps and there's always parts missing because our entire narrative is when it is told, the entire narrative is not told. So then we jump to the Civil Rights Movement, which was led by people such as Dr. King. Yeah, these things should be taught, and these things should be analyzed and dissected in our classrooms, because what it does provide a testament for the resilience and perseverance of Black people, despite all these incomprehensible obstacles and adversities, such as slavery, that we were able to survive, and not only survive, we were able to thrive and still be contributors to civilization and society. The Civil Rights Movement shows our ability to organize and be intentional with our organization, not to only improve our conditions, but also improve the entire human condition. But we need to go seek and go beyond that and go bigger than that. So as a Black boy coming through an educational system, which is very Eurocentric, an educational system that barely validates my humanity, where did I find my power? I found my power through hip hop culture. And it was rappers such as Nas, Poor Righteous Teachers, Tribe Called Quest, Jungle Brothers, Big Daddy Kane, that had references that brought me to the teachings of Noble Drew Ali, Clarence 13X, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, etc. And there was also, I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and it was also one of my brothers who would bring me books, such as The Nile River Valley Contributions of Civilization by Anthony T. Browder, Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams, and the various books written by Ishak Musa Barashengo. But in hip hop, like for example, one of my favorite rappers is Nas. And he wrote this in the lyrics in one of his songs called If I Ruled the World featuring Lauryn Hill. So many years of depression makes me vision the better living type of place to raise kids in, open their eyes to the lies history's told foul. And what Nas does here is exactly what Woodson did earlier, is that you summarize the sociological and psychological damage, not only when our history is not taught, but when our history is taught incorrectly and when our entire narrative is not told or controlled by us. So, flowing with the theme of our conference, educational transformation, integrating African and African American studies from contributions to social action, was predicated on Dr. James Banks' levels of integration of multicultural content. So what I'm going to try my best ever to do during this presentation is take us to level 3 and 4, transformation approach, where the structure of curriculum is changed to enable the students to view concepts from diverse perspectives, and in this case, Afrocentric perspectives, where we're going to take the very structure of the curriculum that we've known, that we traditionally see in our classrooms, and we're going to flip it. Then we can hopefully that we can help our students identify their power, and we can inspire our students into social action. So as we face current events that are resulted from George Floyd's death and our response to police brutality and structural racism, we're stepping into spaces that we're having conversations that we've never had before, and we're having conversations openly, which causes some people to be discomforted, to become uncomfortable, or create discomfort among some people about having some of these conversations, right? And also we're shifting narratives and we're shifting perspectives. So Frantz Fanon, in his book, Black Skin, White Mask, writes this: sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It will create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect the core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with that core belief. So for example, when you speak to people who do not have the same experiences of racism that I do, they believe I'm exaggerating, or you got to get out here, that can't be real, or that can't be true. But it is true. And that discomfort in those conversations is called cognitive dissonance. And also when we start talking about true history and accurate history, just like we say that Black people don't know our history, white people don't know their history either. But we need to flip that narrative, and we need to start digging deeper to expose and create a new narrative, not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of our children. So my team and I, we conduct various professional development sessions throughout our district. And after one of our sessions, there was a teacher that came up to me having a conversation about her having a strong desire to want to teach Black history in her classroom, but where do you start? Do you start in Africa? Do you start here in North America? Do we start in the Caribbean? Where do we start? My advice to her, and always will be, we start from the very beginning of human civilization, and understanding that African people are native to the entire planet, not just the African continent. So let me explain. First of all, we must understand that all of us have a common ancestor from the African continent. And throughout thousands and millennials of time periods, that these people migrated and settled into different parts of the world and built civilizations and society. For example, the Grimaldi man was a name formerly given to two skeletons which were discovered in the Grimaldi caverns of Italy. Early scientists identified the Grimaldi man as a Negroid, which will also be classified as the modern ancestor for modern Europeans. There's also groups of people that we know as the Negrito people, right? And these are some of the indigenous and earlier links to some of our ancestors. And these people live throughout the Indian Ocean, Oceania, and also Asia. Like for example, you see these people with strong African characteristics right here, and they're native and indigenous to an island known as a group of islands known as the Andaman Islands, which lay in the Bay of Bengal off the coast of India. We see similar people in places like Thailand. These are known as the Manik people. We see the Batik people in Malaysia. We see the various groups that live in Papua New Guinea, the indigenous people to the Philippines, the Aboriginal people of Australia, some of the indigenous people of China, even some of the indigenous people to Japan. Then even coming into the Americas, of Mesoamerica, or Middle America, present-day Mexico, the Olmecs were the earliest known major civilization in Mesoamerica, which dates back to 1400 BC. So now, if we're going to talk about African history, and we're going to discuss and divulge into African history, right? One of the things that I've seen throughout our school district is our schools honor Black History Month. And this is dope. I love it when I see our kids honoring and commemorate our history, and also taking advantage of the time to raise our consciousness and awareness of teaching Black history. And during these ceremonies, I see various programs where kids conduct speeches that say that when we were slaves, we overcome this, and this is what life was like when we were slaves. And I've seen kids sing songs like "We Shall Overcome" and "Wade in the Water." And again, our kids should know that history and identify with their ancestors who came those obstacles, and our ancestors who survived those obstacles and still survived, and we not only survived, but we thrived. But what would it be like if our kids were saying when we were astronomers, scientists, architects, scholars, and even kings and queens? Jamaican poet wrote it best, Muta Baruka, when he said slavery is an African history, it interrupted African history. So we must identify that slavery was not the starting point of African people, but African people has a history that extends thousands of years. So for example, would it be nice to see our children say, when I was Narma, Nefertiti, Akhenaten, Tai, Ramses II, Hatshepsut, Taharka, Mansa Musa, Askia Muhammad I, Queen Nzinga, Amina, Shaka, Ya, Asatwa, Menelik II, Tetu Batul, Haile Selassie. And these are only a few of the monarchs that existed throughout the centuries and the thousands of years of African history. So during this presentation, I want to kind of dig a little deeper, and I'm only even scratching the surface because I'm trying to be as concise as possible and get to the point, because this could be an exhaustive list of great Africans and people of African descent that have made huge contributions to the development of civilization and mankind. King Menes, for example, 3150, he unified Upper and Lower Kemet. Kemet is the ancient name for Egypt, and it literally translates to Black land. And when he unified Upper and Lower Egypt into one single monarchy, he established the first dynasty in Egyptian history. It should be normalized that our students should know who Imhotep was. In 27th century BC, he was the architect of the first pyramid. He was a physician, also a high priest. He was a multi-level genius, and this is known as a polymath. And he's the first documented polymath in human history of Black Africa. Queen Amani-Renas. She was the queen of the Kingdom of Kush, and she ruled Kush from the imperial capital of when it was located at Merowe. Kush was a kingdom in Africa that would be present-day northern Sudan and southern Egypt. It was founded in 1070 BC. Kandakia Kandaki was a title given to a ruling queen in the Kushite kingdom. She was known as Kandakia Amani-Renas. She was most famous because in 24 BC, she led a successful military campaign against the Roman Empire. The University in Timbuktu. Traditional narratives don't paint Africa as a center of learning, but the University in Timbuktu, founded in 989 AD, was one of the most renowned universities and learning centers in the entire world. University in Timbuktu is a collective term for the teaching centers associated with 3 mosques in the city of Timbuktu, which is now Mali. Among the subjects in the degrees offered here outside of Islam and teachings of the Quran were mathematics, physics, medicine, surgery, philosophy, and even skilled trades. And also the university in Timbuktu was known for having a library system of thousands of books written by African authors. Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali from 1312 to 1337. Mali was a prosperous kingdom, one of the many kingdoms that existed in West Africa. And it was prosperous because of the natural resources, most notably gold and salt. Mansa Musa is known as the wealthiest person who ever existed in human history with a net worth of 400 billion US dollars with an adjusted inflation. In 1324, he was famous because he brought international attention to the Kingdom of Mali when he was accompanied by tens of thousands of soldiers. In addition, they were joined by numerous camels and horses, each carrying gold. There's a story when Mansa Musa, during his pilgrimage, he stopped in Kemet or Egypt, and he gifted so many gold that he inadvertently damaged the economy for the next 10 years. Now we celebrate Columbus Day, as Columbus so-called discovered the New World. It can't be a new world and it can't be discovered if people were here. But even before Columbus, you had people like Abubakar II who set sail to the New World in 1311. There were Egyptian artifacts that were found in North America, and also narcotics, which were indigenous to the Americas, found in tombs of mummies in Egypt or Kemet. And also there were similarities in Native American and African religions that just strongly suggest that Africans had early contact with Native Americans before the discovery of the New World. The concept of engineering and building pyramids. And also there were accounts of other European explorers that had been coming to America before and after Columbus that had contact with African people. The Dogon people, which is an ethnic group living in central Mali, their traditional religion actually incorporates details of extrasolar astronomical bodies. And not only with these astronomical bodies that they incorporate within their spiritual beliefs, but these bodies can't be seen with the naked eye. And this is before so-called modern science and before the so-called scientific revolution. For example, they have details about the Sirius star system. Dogon people had information about planets, even within our own solar system. Like, for example, Saturn has rings, and they even identify 4 of the major moons of the planet Jupiter. The Dahomey Amazons, all-female military regiment of the Kingdom of Dahomey, which is present-day Benin. They were formed in 1645, and their original name is Mino, which is our mothers. But they were named by Western historians, the Amazons, due to their similarity to the mythical Amazons from Greek mythology. These soldiers were fiercely trained and fierce fighters, and they were actually extremely influential in the politics of the Kingdom of Dahomey. Matter of fact, if any of us have seen the movie Black Panther or read any of the comic books, Black Panther, they were the inspiration for the Dora Milaje, who were the personal bodyguards of King T'Challa, who held the mantle of the Black Panther. So slavery would be a conversation that will take place if we're going to teach the history of African people. It's a part of our history. But let's switch the narrative. First of all, African people never acquiesced to slavery. Slavery wasn't a choice. Even on the African continent, before the transportation known as the Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean, there were over 400 documented revolts that took place. And there were estimated over 100,000 Africans that possibly died in uprisings off the coast of Africa. So even when we got here, first of all, let's kind of back up. That sometimes we view African slavery as if it only existed in North America, but that only constituted for 5% of slavery that existed in the Western Hemisphere. Most Africans were imported into Latin America. So for example, we have Yanga in Veracruz, Mexico, who led an uprising in 1570. We have people like Zumba of Brazil in the 1670s, who led massive runaway settlements and created what you know as quilombos in the wilderness of Brazil. Quilombos will be similar to what we know as Maroon towns in other places in Latin America and North America. People like Carlotta in 1843, who led a slave insurrection in Cuba. People like Mackendal in 1758, who led a slave insurrection in Haiti. Dirty Bookman, who helped organize the most successful slave insurrection in history, the Haitian Revolution in 1791, And also people like Toussaint Louverture should be in that conversation as well. People like Nanny of the Maroons, a Queen Nanny, a Granny Nanny. And she was the leader of the Jamaican Windward Maroons, who were responsible for freeing over 1,000 slaves in the 1720s and also in the 1730s. Then when we shift up to North America, 1619 was a publication that was released, I believe, last year. And it said the first Africans that were imported to North America as slaves was in 1619 in Virginia. But there are some historical inaccuracies associated with that. And also some narratives are going to change when we look at this. San Miguel de Guadalupe was the earliest or the first documented instance of Black slavery in North America in 1526. And the narrative shifts here. They weren't able to contain these Africans because they rebelled and they fled and they were absorbed with the indigenous population in present-day South Carolina. The Stono Rebellion, 1739, also, which took place in South Carolina. Denmark Vesey, 1822, South Carolina. Gabriel Prosa, 1802, Virginia. Nat Turner, 1831, Virginia. And there were various other cases outside of this. Again, I'm going to repeat, this is only scratching the surface. So every year during 4th of July, I see this up and down my timeline on social media. What were your ancestors doing picking cotton on July 4th, 1776? And this is a partial truth. Yes, out of the 500,000 people of African descent who existed in North America, in the North American colonies on the dawn of the American Revolution, a majority were enslaved, but not all. First of all, when we start talking about the forefathers of our country, people like Crispus Attucks should be mentioned. He was the first person killed in the Boston Massacre in 1770, thus making him the real first martyr and first person killed in the American Revolution and first person who technically died for this country. There were thousands of people of African descent who fought in the American Revolution on both sides of the war. True, we were never able to experience a true freedom and the ideas that the war was predicated upon, but yet we were huge contributors and we are also forefathers of this country. We have all heard of Paul Revere and his ride to warn colonists of an incoming British invasion, but we need to start bringing Wentworth Cheswell into that narrative. He also wrote from Boston to warn colonists in New Hampshire of an incoming British invasion. James Lafayette served as a spy during the American Revolution and was instrumental in helping his country beat their British colonial powers. Peter Salem was famous because of his heroism in the Battle of Bunker Hill. Then also we got our Haitian brothers and sisters that assisted the colonists in the siege of Savannah, the Le Chazor. And also amongst them in 1779 was a man known as Henry Christophe, who eventually became the king of Haiti. Now, when we start talking about heroes, and there are other people that have made positive contributions, who have done amazing things that need to be brought into the fold of the narrative. Bass Reeves, 1875, the first African-American commissioned to serve as a deputy marshal west of the Mississippi River. During his career, it was known and documented that Bass Reeves arrested over 3,000 criminals and killed 14 outlaws. Matter of fact, he's the real life inspiration for what we know as the Lone Ranger. During World War I, you had the 369th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters, and you have Henry Johnson. Henry Johnson didn't even receive a Medal of Honor until 2015 under President Barack Obama. It was a famous story in 1918 where Private Johnson came under attack by 24 German raiders. Using just a grenade, the butt of his rifle, a knife, and his bare hands, he was able to fight off those German soldiers. As a matter of fact, during that fight, he was wounded 21 times and survived. People like Ronald Duncan, the father of American Ninjutsu, with his martial arts technique in the 1960s known as the Way of the Winds. We were instrumental even in martial arts. As a matter of fact, the world's oldest known artistic representation of organized fighting was in 3400 BC on the African continent. World's history's greatest breakthroughs and innovations. You know, we got people like Benjamin Banneker that we can teach our kids about. Matter of fact, it was Benjamin Banneker who borrowed a pocket watch from one of his wealthy acquaintances. And matter of fact, he took that watch apart and built the clock entirely from carved wood. And that clock actually told accurate time for decades afterwards. He was also instrumental for surveying the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and also developed one of the first almanacs made in America, North America. People like Garrett Morgan, who was responsible for creating a modern day gas mask and traffic light. People like Latime, who created the early AC unit and also helped with the designs of the telephone and also created the filament and the light bulb. People like Dr. Charles Drew, who developed techniques for blood storage. And his knowledge was largely responsible for developing what we know as the blood bank. And during World War II, it was his knowledge and expertise that saved the lives of thousands of Allied soldiers. Sisters like Shirley Ann Jackson, who conducted breakthrough scientific research that allows us to have things like the fax machine, touch-tone telephones, solar cells, fiber optic cables. And she was the one also responsible for the technology that we know is call ID and call waiting. So as I conclude, I'm going to conclude with Marcus Garvey's quote: "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." Here in Palm Beach County, well over 30% of our population is of African descent. And amongst this population, we have Black students who are, first of all, basically struggling to only survive. Then we have some of those Black population that are struggling to even find an identity, because we've not helped our kids identify their power. Because one of those things that we've done is that we've not taught our kids our history and taught our kids our true history. So some of our students look at themselves as inferior, and that translates in their academic performance and also their life outcomes. And also their same white peers that sit next to them, if they've learned this history as well, they would see their Black peers as equals and not inferiors. We have a responsibility in education to shift mindsets and eradicate ugliness such as racism. So we need to remove racism from our structures and remove it from our curriculum. We have the opportunity to shift and create a new normal. We have the opportunity to redesign and reform and reimagine our educational system that we can empower, elevate, and inspire our students. So thank you for joining me for this presentation, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the Institute. Peace.